If you're at all familiar with the case of the murder of a young woman named Hae Min Lee and the subsequent arrest and conviction of her former boyfriend Adnan Syed, then you know the name Hope Schab, who was Hae Min Lee's French teacher at Woodlawn High School. Now, Hope Schab is important to me for one big reason. Let me get my book here, hold it up. Hope Schab is the one who set me personally on the road to writing this book, because she is the one who gave, I think kind of inadvertently, the little nugget of information that I think forms the basis of the motive for Hae's murder, or at least for the motive of the confrontation that resulted in Hae's killing. This murder of Hae Min Lee was not premeditated at all. And I believe that, as Schab said, Hae wanted to move in with Don Kleindienst, her then current boyfriend, and this pushed Don into a confrontation with her, saying, "You can't do that, and we just need to break up." And that led to a very ugly scene that I believe led to Hae's death. So Hope Schab is very important to me because I wouldn't be making this video. I would not have written this book without that little piece of information, which, as far as I can tell, has never been followed up by anybody else. But in the terms of the general case, the general information about this case as a whole, Hope Schab is important because, in my estimation, she is very misjudged. She is often labeled as someone who turned against Adnan, who became hostile to him, and who tried to get him convicted. And when he was a student, he wasn't her student personally, but he was in the magnet program. She would have known him very well. So why did she turn against him? And the answer to that question is, that's not exactly what she did. So let's take a look at her and the part that she played, minor as it was in the overall case. She has no real impact on the outcome of Adnan's case and conviction, but she is an interesting case study in, just like with Jay Wiles, in people's motivations. Why do they do what they do? And of course, in the end, that's often completely unknowable. We often don't know ourselves why we do things, but I think we can parse out at least some details about Hope Schab. I would love to talk to her. I doubt she'll ever watch this video, but if somebody wants to pass on the word, I would love to sit down and have an interview with her. I think she's really been misjudged. Okay, so who is Hope Schab? Well, as we know, she was Hae's French teacher, but she was far more than that. Hae had taken French 2 of the 3 years preceding her senior year in high school. I'm not sure when Hope Schab actually started teaching at Woodlawn. She was only 26 when Hae disappeared. So if she did start teaching at Woodlawn when Hae was a freshman, then she, that is Schab, would have been fresh out of college, which is perfectly possible. And Hae had missed out on 1 year of Schab's or whoever's French class. I believe it's her sophomore year, because that's the year that Hae, her brother Young, and her mother Yoon Hwa Kim went to California to visit Yoon Hwa's so-called fiance. Well, I don't think we've ever tracked down who that man is. And Hae was late getting back for the school year, and I think the French class was already full. but she was obviously very, very interested in French. She was signed up to go on the class trip to France in February. I think she'd already paid for her ticket. And more to the point, for Schab's part in this case, Hay had asked if Hope Schab could mentor her, if they could have some one-on-one French, intensive French conversation and study in some kind of student aid sort of program. And so Schab had agreed to this, and she had actually given up her first hour free period every day to meet with Hay. And she says, almost 20 years later in the HBO documentary, that she thought of Hay almost as if she were her daughter. But Hay was way too old to be her daughter. Hope Schab was way too young to be her mother. She's looking at the past through the lens of the present. They were only 8 years apart in age. I think they were friends. They had a lot in common. Obviously, Hay loved French, or she wouldn't be going to all this trouble to have extra study time. And so that was one bond between them. Another bond was love of fashion and style. If you have watched the HBO documentary, The Case Against Adnan Syed, and I really recommend it if you have not watched it and you're interested in this case, it's very well done. It's available on a number of platforms. And so Schab is interviewed, and she is, at that point, in her mid-40s, stunningly beautiful and stylish, beautiful makeup, hair, nails, everything flawless. And she says in that interview about Hay that Hay would come in every morning with her coffee, thus showing a girl with the right priorities, wearing some cute little outfit, and her long hair was always beautiful and shiny. She loved fashion. And there's actually a page in Hay's diary where she's made some sketches of dresses. I think she must have just not had anything else to draw on, so she drew on that. So these are two young women who are friends. That's what they are. They're friends. They enjoy spending time together. They also have one further thing in common, and that is their dating lives. So Schab says on the stand at Adnan's trial, she's asked, had you ever been involved in what they call an interfaith relationship? And she says, yes, I've dated several men who were Jewish. And then, of course, Hay was involved in an interfaith relationship with Adnan, with her from her Roman Catholic background and Adnan from a strongly conservative Muslim family. So they even had that in common. Schab mentions that sometimes they would have breakfast together, and I'm sure that there were a lot of things for them to talk about over the breakfast burritos. Okay, so that's who she is, the young, pretty, cool French teacher at Woodlawn High School. Now, why is Hope Schab testifying at this trial? Not just because she's an interesting person. She's a witness for the prosecution. Kevin Urich has heard this story that he wants Hope Schab to tell on the stand, that he thinks is incriminating. And Christina Gutierrez, Adnan's incompetent lawyer, is just as determined that he's not going to get this story into the public record of the trial testimony. And I think she was really just kind of shooting herself in the foot because she clearly did not understand the story. I don't think she ever interviewed Adnan or had someone interview him about this incident. She just knew that there was this story about Hay hiding out from Adnan one day at school and Hope Schab helping Hay do this. And that didn't sound very good. So she kept objecting. There's actually a bench conference. You can read all about it in the trial transcript when she says to the judge, I don't think this is relevant. I don't think he should be able to ask about this. And Urich says, well, Your Honor, I'm trying to draw a complete picture of how this relationship developed over the course of a number of months. So the judge says, all right, Mr. Urich, I'm going to allow this testimony as long as I think it is relevant. And Gutierrez says, well, Your Honor, I want to register a continuing objection. And the judge says, okay. And by continuing objection, I believe that means that Gutierrez is a little more free, I guess you'd say, to keep popping up like a jack-in-the-box and saying, Your Honor, I object, without being slapped down too badly. Now, you have to remember here, I didn't quite realize this so strongly until I started studying these trial transcripts. When you object, as let's say you're the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney is pursuing a line of question you don't like in this case. And so you keep popping up and objecting, even if your objection is overruled, you have interrupted the flow of the questioning. It can be very frustrating. And it's clear when you study this transcript that Urich got what he could out of Hope Schab on this particular incident, and then he just gave up and moved on to something else. Okay, so what happened? As I have reconstructed this from the little bits and pieces that finally were allowed to come out on the stand. So Hay would come in every morning, and they would have some work to do and also a lot of socializing. So Urich says, now, was there a day when Adnan Syed came to your classroom when Hay was there, when this particular incident happened? And Schab says, yes, there was. I don't remember exactly when it was. I will say this has to have been after the disastrous harvest dance at the end of October 1998, when Adnan's parents had shown up. They had made Adnan come out to them. They did not go into the dance, but they sent somebody in to get Adnan. They made him leave. They said, you're not supposed to be here. This is mixed dancing. You have to come home with us. Adnan was humiliated and utterly outraged, and so was Hay. And it was at that point that she decided this is not working. And she wrote that famous breakup note that then Adnan and Aisha Pittman scribbled on during health class, but I'm not really interested in that. The note itself that Hay wrote to Adnan, we think like Monday or Tuesday, I think it's November 1st or 2nd, right after the dance. It's a pretty mature, level-headed note. She says, look, people break up all the time and they get on with their lives. You'll get over it and I'll get over it. Now, she doesn't really stick to that. She keeps swinging back and forth, but she does say that this is it. We need to break up. Okay. Adnan is having none of this until she definitively breaks up with him, which is like December 19th or 20th, that weekend. He's still very much interested in, committed to keeping this relationship going. And so he comes to Hope Schab's class first hour. But now wait a minute. Is this something unusual? Does he show up and make a big scene? No. This is one of the really interesting things about this story. Urich says to Schab, all right, so he came to your class one day. You think maybe she never says exactly when. I'm saying sometime early November. Then he says, had he ever come to your classroom before when Hae-min Lee was there? And she says, oh, yes. And then he says, well, how often did he come? And she says, oh, 2 or 3 times a week. When I read that, I was completely taken aback. I thought, what? You're letting your student aide's boyfriend just drop by periodically, apparently quite regularly, when you guys are supposed to be working. And so then I realized, well, what was going on here, almost certainly, is that Adnan had first hour free on A days or B days. Remember, of course, Woodlawn has block scheduling. And so you have longer class periods. And so obviously what was happening here is that Adnan has a free first hour for one set of classes. We'll say A days. So on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 1 week, he's got first hour free and he can drop by, maybe have a breakfast burrito. And then the next week, his A days would be Tuesday and Thursday. So there we are, 2 or 3 days a week. It's a perfectly normal thing for him to stop by and share in the conversation. That means that Hope Schab has had plenty of time to see Hae and Adnan interact in her classroom, just the two of them. All right, so now we get to this specific day that Kevin Urich somehow has heard about. And I am going to assume the only thing that really makes sense is that this is maybe right after Hae has written this note, or maybe this is after Adnan has called her and said, you can't possibly mean this, or maybe they've had some kind of confrontation right before school. It's not really clear. What is clear is that Adnan wants to talk to Hae, but Hae doesn't want to talk to Adnan. Not because she's afraid of him, but because she just doesn't want to deal with it. She has told him, we need to just break this off. And we've all had this experience where you've decided, I need to end this relationship, and the other person just doesn't want to let go. That's the way Hae feels about Adnan. I think that's very clear. She talks about this in her diary also. So she knows, you can imagine her thought processes. Today is an A day. Adnan's going to come to Miss Schab's classroom. I don't want to see him. I don't want to have this drama. So I'm not going to go to class. I'm going to go hide out in the bathroom or something and hope that he goes away, and then I'll come back. So Schab says on the stand, yes, there was a day when Adnan came into my classroom and Hae was not there. And he kind of stood around for a while, sat down at one of the back desks, looked out the window. He's obviously waiting for Hae to show up. He thinks she's just in the bathroom or something. Finally, it becomes clear after a few minutes that Hae's not coming. So he starts talking to, as he would call her, Miss Schab. And what he asks her is very interesting. He says, do you think that an interfaith relationship can survive on love alone, or does there need to be a common religion and culture? Now, that was a very good question for him to ask. I think he knew from maybe even from hearing Hae and Schab talk about this, that Hope Schab had these relationships with guys who belonged to other faiths, in particular the Jewish faith. And so he thought, well, Hae's not here. I'll talk to her teacher. I'll find out what she thinks. So what does Hope Schab say? Well, we don't know, because the questioning gets interrupted. But then Schab says the phone rang. Now, this is the wall telephone, part of the intra-school system. So teachers can call each other's classrooms or they can call the office from this system. And so the phone rings. Schab picks it up, and it is Hay. And she immediately says, don't let on that it's me. Pretend that I'm just another teacher. So clearly what she wants is to find out if Adnan's still there. That's the only reason she would do this. But she doesn't want Adnan to know she's calling. Now, what does Hope Schab say to her? What does Hae-Min Lee say to her? We don't know because Christina Gutierrez keeps interrupting. And so Urich figures, okay, I think I've established what I want to establish, that it sounds like Hay didn't want to see Adnan. Maybe she was scared of him. And so he goes on to something else. And he drops that line of questioning. So we never really get the whole story. And I'm sure, Gutierrez is supposed to be such an experienced defense lawyer. I just feel like surely she would know that the jury would be sitting there thinking, I wonder what that was all about. Sure would like to know the whole story. That lawyer of his, boy, she sure doesn't want us to hear this story. It must be something really bad. I just think the whole thing was so counterproductive. But anyway, it gets dropped. Okay, so now time passes. Hay and Adnan break up definitively over that third weekend in December, and then we have Christmas break, and everybody comes back to school, and then we get to January 13th, the day that Hay disappears. Schab is asked on the stand, when did you find out that Hay was missing? And she says, well, I think it was that weekend or maybe it was Monday, but it has to be earlier than that because of what I'll get to in just a second here. And it couldn't be Monday because Monday there was no school. That was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So on January 13th, Hay disappears. We think, I've read some brief fleeting reference to the idea that there was an attempt to call Schab that day. I don't think it was from the police. I think it was from a student. And she was out with her boyfriend. And so she didn't get the call. It's all kind of murky. That there was an attempt to contact her then, but it was not successful. Then, of course, Thursday, the ice storm hits, and a lot of phone lines are down. Remember, almost no one has a cell phone, so it's all landlines. The phone lines are down. If you have a pager, you can page someone, but you can't talk to them on the phone. And by Friday afternoon, I think the ice storm has abated and the crews are out and they're repairing the lines. Friday night, this is the important date here for this next bit of information. Friday night is Krista Meyer's 18th birthday party that's held at the fire station. She didn't realize when they rented out that fire station for the party that was going to be a great place to have the party because, of course, a fire station, just like a hospital, any other emergency services facility is going to have backup generators. So even if the lines are not completely restored, the fire station will have power. They're having it there, by the way, because Krista's father was a volunteer firefighter. And she had invited basically the whole magnet program to her 18th birthday party. They couldn't cram everybody into their house, so they had it at the fire station. Okay, so now we get to this next little bit of information because, of course, Hay doesn't show up. And she is very good friends with Krista. She's promised faithfully that she will be there at the party, but she's not there. We know, of course, she's not there because she's dead, but they don't know that. So they're talking, and I quote in the book, and this is the little nugget of information that I referred to earlier, that the students are all worried Debbie Warren says in the documentary that they were all trying to figure out why Hayes wasn't there, but they decided to just try to have a good time and not let it spoil the evening. But according to an episode on the Undisclosed podcast, that great follow-up podcast by Rabia Chaudhry, Colin Miller, and Susan Simpson, somebody at that party says that Hayes' French teacher had said that Hay and Dawn were making plans to move in together. Of course, it was really just Hay who was making the plans. So where did that come from? And the only thing I can think of, Hope Schab, if you're out there, I want to talk to you. The only thing I can think of is that this was something that Hay had kept to herself. And it was such a, explosive bit of news that she had, for once, not told anybody about it, but she tells her trusted mentor and friend, older, wiser friend, Hope Schab, oh, you know what? I'm going to get away from my mom. I'm going to move in with Dawn. There's no reason why I can't. I'm 18. She can't stop me. I have my own car. I'll still pick up my cousin and I'll still go to work. I'll still do everything the same. I just won't be going home every night and facing my mom and having to argue with her. So Schab knows this. And I postulate that sometime on the afternoon of Friday, February 15th, the day of the party, that Schab gets a phone call. She says in her testimony, they came to me and told me that Hay was missing. But I think it must be somebody called her. And I think that somebody was probably Debbie Warren, Hayes' good friend. And I can imagine this panicky call. You know, the phone lines have finally been restored. And so somebody, we'll say Debbie, calls Hope Schab and says, Miss Schab, I don't know if you've heard or not, but Heyman Lee is missing. Nobody's seen her since the end of the school day on Wednesday. And we're all really worried. We've been paging her like mad, but she's not answering her pager. Do you know anything? And Schab, I think, and I've been a high school teacher, I think her first instinct is to kind of try to calm things down. She doesn't necessarily think this through logically with a rational timeline there on the phone with this panicky student. Because, of course, the ice storm didn't start until Thursday morning, but I think she immediately thought, oh, that girl. She's with Dawn. She went to spend time with Dawn and she got socked in by the ice storm. That's what's going on. And she is going to be in such trouble. Her mother is going to kill her. And so I think she just thought, well, let's just calm this student down. And so I will tell this student this little bit of confidential information because otherwise it's going to be full-blown panic mode. So she says to Debbie, oh, don't worry about it. She is with Dawn. She'll be back in school next week. I'm sorry that you're so worried, but that's what must have happened. So get on with your party and don't worry about it. So then Debbie says they were talking about it at the party. She does not mention this going to live with Dawn idea. But she is saying that they thought that's what she must be doing. Debbie in the documentary does not mention going to live with Dawn. But in the podcast, we're told somebody at the party said that, just to be clear here. Okay, so I'm going to assume that Schab then, just figured, oh, that girl, I'm going to have a lot to say to her Tuesday morning. She fully expected Hay to be back in school Tuesday. It, I think it's fair to say it never occurred to her to think that something had actually happened. So I want you to imagine her walking into her classroom Tuesday morning. This would be February 19th. As I say, fully expecting Hay to be there, and there's no Hay. And Hay is never late. She's very dependable. I can just imagine this kind of, wow, where is she? Surely she's not still up at Dawn's. And so she calls the office. Probably. Maybe they call her. I don't know. This is Hope Schab. I'm Heyman Lee's first hour teacher. She's not here. Have you gotten a call from the family? And I believe that what she would have been told was, yes, the family did call a little while ago. Heyman Lee is missing. They have not seen her since Wednesday. And they just want us to know that the police are involved, that they are really trying to figure out where she is. And please just be assured that we're doing everything we can to find her. Don't take her name off the enrollment list. And you can imagine Hope Schab thinking, oh my goodness, something really has happened to her. And so then I believe this is where this whole series of events takes place, where Hope Schab is looked upon as an enemy of Adnan. But I think what she did, what she must have done, is called the police. Hey, this is Heyman Lee's French teacher, Hope Schab, and I'm just wondering, has anybody talked to Don Kleindienst? This is Heyman Lee's current boyfriend, and Hay's been talking about moving in with him. Has he been checked up on? And of course, if she did this, and I believe she did, I cannot believe she didn't do this, she would have been told, oh, yes, ma'am, we have talked to him. He says he was at work. We are going to do a little more checking, which they do, but he seems to have an alibi. And it may even be because of that phone call from Schab that the police say, we ought to confirm that alibi. So if you know this case, you will know that I believe it's Joe O'Shea calls of the Baltimore County Police. Remember, Hay is still just a missing person. This is not a murder case yet. He calls the Owings Mills LensCrafters, where Don and Hay both worked, and he talks to a manager there with the initial CM. And of course, that has to be Catherine Michelle, the romantic partner of Don's mother, Anita Baird. And they asked, do you have records here showing that Don was working at this other location on January 13th and January 16th? Do you have anything like that? And she says, oh, yes. And she obviously is reading off of something. She gives these very precise times. And we know now, because of all the dogged work by especially Bob Ruff of the Truth and Justice podcast, that a manager at one of these LensCrafters, in particular Don's mother, Anita Baird, could go into employee records and change times or add hours or whatever. If an employee said, oh, I forgot to check in or I forgot to check out or whatever, but that this had to be done within the time period, the pay period. And that pay period was over on January 22nd, the same day that the police called this mysterious, although not so mysterious, CM and got these times. Okay, so they may have, the police may have called Hope Schab back. She may have called them back again and said, "Did you ever check up on Don? Did you confirm his alibi?" "Oh, yes, ma'am. We called. We got the times. He's got a time card. It's all confirmed." And the police said at the time, Don has an airtight alibi. So then you can imagine Hope Schab thinking, well, I guess Don is out of the picture. Who does that leave? I mean, I can't imagine that Adnan would do anything to her. I just don't know. I just picture her being utterly bewildered. Okay, then we know that the police get a tip on February 1st, or probably the weekend before, from the Lee family, not from Jay, saying you ought to take a look at the ex-boyfriend. And so the police show up on February 1st at Woodlawn to question the students and the teachers. What do you know about the relationship between Heyman Lee and Adnan Syed? Well, I think they already knew about Hope Schab. Schab had already called them and they had talked to her. They knew who she was. And so when they went around and they interviewed people and they got nowhere, because of course there was nowhere to get, then they thought, maybe we could ask that nice French teacher who's been calling us. She seems really concerned. Let's see if she'd be willing to do some kind of unofficial questioning. And of course, that was very inappropriate. Colin Miller is totally outraged about this on the Undisclosed podcast. And of course, Hope Schab should have said, I don't think that's really appropriate. But this is a murder case. I'm not excusing anybody, but it's just kind of, they're up against a brick wall. So she comes up with the list of questions, including where did Hay and Adnan go to hook up? What were some special places? She makes up this list of questions. We all know the story. She gives the list of questions to Debbie Warren. Debbie Warren sticks it in the back of her agenda, her calendar. Adnan borrows Debbie's agenda because that also acts as a hall pass, and Adnan forgot his at home. And he needs to go to the bathroom. And maybe the page falls out or something, and he thinks, what is this? So when Debbie gets her agenda back, that sheet of questions is not there anymore. Adnan goes to Hope Schab and says, politely, knock it off. And I think that's where the whole thing ends. There's no indication that Schab ever tried then to pursue any kind of questioning. And then, of course, she drops out of sight until trial when she gives her story, which, if you look at it now, I hope, from the scenario I've laid out, she's simply doing what the police asked her to do. And she's really tried to check up on Don, and he seems to be in the clear, so that leaves Adnan. And so maybe I better help the police out there. And then she disappears until the HBO documentary. So she's a woman who tried to do the right thing, I think. I don't think she turned against Adnan. She was just doing what the police asked her to do. And there she is. Hope Schab, love to talk to you. Hope you found this interesting. Buy my book and find out my full story about how I think this case really spooled out to its tragic